mixing church and state is like mixing ice cream and manure. It doesn't hurt the manure, but it sure messes up the ice cream. And that's kind of also the Roger Williams idea of separation of church and state that Thomas Jefferson was borrowing from. Roger Williams was concerned about the purity of the church, the garden. So he wanted a wall, a hedge, protecting it from the wilderness, the politics, right? And we'd seen hints of that. We've seen, spikes of Christian nationalism throughout the years, throughout our history, as you all have been covering. But we're at a whole different level now. I mean, this is a real problem, and we are losing entire generations because of this. I mean, this is, I think we might all be millennials. I'm an old millennial. Our era, our generations have been growing up in this mixing of church and state and the Christian nationalism, and are walking away from the churches. Right. And the evangelical and charismatic church embrace of Donald Trump is going to leave a mark on a generation. I mean, we're going to find ourselves essentially in a generational wilderness wandering before people are going to trust the church again. And that's what has really changed, is recognizing like, wow, like we have mixed the ice cream and the manure here because we ourselves crapped all over it. Like we did this to the church's witness.
Hey, welcome back to our Church and State 250 series, where we've been following the role of religion in America from the world that existed before 1776 through the founding, slavery, segregation, civil religion, the religious right, Christian nationalism, and the political movements that are still shaping the country today. We've spoken with historians, legal scholars, sociologists, theologians, and all kinds of experts who have helped us understand a central truth behind the series, and that's you can't tell the story of America without talking about religion. So for our final episode, we are joined by Brian Kaylor. He is one of our probably most frequented guests and a friend of ours. And he is here to help us look at where we've been, where we're going, and kind of what's the government up to with regards to religion and the government. So for a little introduction, Brian's the president editor-in-chief of Word and Way. It's an independent Christian media organization founded in 1896. He is a Baptist minister with a PhD in political communication from the University of Missouri, and is also the author and co-author of several books on religion and politics, including Sacramental Politics, Baptizing America, and the Bible According to Christian Nationalists. The only reason I have Sacramental Politics on there is because I pulled your book from my shelf.
Nice.
Nice.
And I was thinking to myself that this is the only book of yours I have ever purchased, and it was purchased before I met you. And now
wow.
There you go. You're like, wow.
I'm glad to know I met one of my 12 people who bought that book. So.
Yeah, it's like $120 book now.
That's why I left academic publishing.
So anyways, welcome back to the show, Brian. It's so good to have you.
Yeah, it's always great to be with you all, and I look forward to wrapping up this episode so you all can take a big long nap after your series.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and it's been very, very, we have gotten a lot of really great comments and feedback. Our YouTube comment sections is blowing up. People are having dialogues in it, which is really weird. Nobody's dropped an N-word yet, or used anything that has caused YouTube to automatically ban it or something. So it's going really good. But I want to start first just by, talking a little bit about your career, because I think it's really, really interesting. And I think it's really relevant to this conversation because, we have spoken to darn near, 400 some odd different people, guests, journalists all over the place since we've started this podcast. You are a religion journalist. And I think that's important to distinguish. So help us better understand, what is a religion, journalist, a religion reporter, and kind of what's the role that they play?
Yeah, and I think that is a great question, because there's obviously a lot of reporters that are writing about religion at some point, regardless of the beat that they're on. So you might have, we'll talk about some stuff with the Pentagon. You might have a Pentagon reporter has to write about the religion sometimes. An environmental reporter might, deal with a church group. An economic reporter might, get in with something related to religion. All those things kind of happen. But a religion reporter is starting with the religion angle as the forefront. And a religion reporter might end up having to write about healthcare or politics or a whole number of other things, but they're starting with the framework of this is the most important part of the story that I'm wanting to cover, as opposed to, say, a political reporter starting with the political angle even when they cover something religious. And I think that's really significant. And I've brought that background as someone who has pastored a church and worked for a number of religious organizations. I've also taught at a university, including, media classes. And so I have that kind of dual world of the background. I mean, you heard that in my bio, a Baptist minister with a PhD in political communication. So I do get into those other worlds, but writing for a religious publication, even about a political event, is different than writing for a political publication about that same event.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. And, this whole series we've been trying to really explain and explore, particularly the role of Christianity, but you could think of even broader the role of religion in American politics. Of course, we've focused on Christianity and the America 250. And, obviously, America has a very complicated relationship with Christianity. It has one where it's not one Christianity, it's Christianities, although you can put them under one umbrella in terms of some beliefs. There's so much diversity within it. And so I imagine for a reporter coming up to this and a journalist looking at religion, it can be a couple things, either bewildering, not even knowing where to start, or maybe you can just, I know exactly what's going on. It's all Christian. It's all this, it's all that. And you can either get so confused, or you can get so confident that you know exactly what it is based on previous assumptions. And I guess when you're looking at your job and you're thinking about the role of journalists in what we're doing and in our nation in particular, how should someone who's a journalist approach Christianity and religion in a way, and how has it really shaped journalism in America that you understand? How does someone who is a journalist right now, how should they approach religion today, as we're facing our current situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's two big problems that I have seen in the way religion is covered, particularly when we're looking at religion in public life, which would be political reporting and other type of kind of public reporting. And one of those is the lack of biblical literacy. So that's one thing. One thing that happens is that a lot of reporters just miss the biblical references or the meaning of the references. And I'll give you an example of this. So earlier this year, Doug Wilson, who is a significant figure, you all have talked about him. He gets a lot of attention. He was just, had a big long interview with NPR a couple weeks ago. He founded the denomination that Pete Hegseth is part of. That's one of the reasons why he gets a lot of attention. So he preached at the Pentagon back in February. I actually broke that story because I watch these services live every month, as you all know. And so it's the first one to write that he had been there. But then once that came out, once the news was out that Wilson had done it, a number of other political reporters went back and were writing about the service as well. And I noticed something that happened, that there was a quote where he talks about the Pentagon services. He talks about them as a sign that God, he said, "We should know by now what God likes to do is to take the most unlikely materials and do something glorious with it. Take a prayer meeting at the Pentagon for a possible example. Many stranger things have happened. God is great." And if you look at the quotes in a number of the mainstream news organizations, that's where the quote stops. Now, my earlier report that came out actually continued because he went immediately from saying God is great to quoting Acts 4:31, which is about the day of Pentecost. And I thought that was so significant. It's actually literally in the headline of my piece. I said, Doug Wilson preaches at Pentagon, compare services to day of Pentecost. I thought that quote was so important. I put it in the headline, and yet all of the other, the mainstream news organizations, they stopped the exact same quote right before the day of Pentecost Bible verse. And I think it's because they didn't get it, right? They didn't understand the significance of what was happening there, because he didn't say explicitly, but it was very clear what he was doing. So that's the first thing that I think we need from reporters, is an awareness of what they don't know. And what I mean by that is then they have to reach out to somebody to figure out, hey, what does this mean? And there are a lot of reporters that are doing great work in this. I've had conversations with many trying to explain some of the religious meaning of various Bible verses that are being used by administration figures and so forth. And I know some reporters reach out to other scholars and pastors and so forth to get that kind of doing some of the background work that, you all are doing more publicly with your series here, right? There are some reporters that are doing that, but a lot of them are not. Maybe they don't know what they don't know. Right. And so that's the one area that I think we have a problem is the lack of biblical literacy. The second thing is, though, as I think a lot of reporters also have a kind of flattened or limited view of what it means to talk about religion, or especially Christianity in politics today. And so what that means is that basically that's conservative, right-wing evangelicals. And we might throw in some Catholics while we're at it too, right? And that's what it means to talk about Christianity in politics today. And that is it's a really outdated vision and understanding of what's happening in the world of religion and politics today. They'll often justify it by talking about, how big of a voting bloc evangelicals are, but the numbers they're using are usually like 20 years out of date. Like we're still stuck in the George W. Bush administration in thinking about the influence of evangelicals in politics today. And I mean, we see this every election cycle. We went through this in 2024. There was all the news attention, all the articles, can Kamala Harris win evangelicals? No, and it doesn't matter, right? Because this is the most solid religious bloc for Trump. We've seen this cycle after cycle. They weren't going to work. They weren't going to win them over. And also didn't matter because they're not even the leading voting bloc religiously in the swing states. Like, if you want to know why Joe Biden won in 2020 and why over, Clinton and Harris's, losses, and just to clarify, yes, Biden did win in 2020. All right. So anyways, just, we always have to make that, why did he win? Right. There's a number of reasons, but if you want to look religiously, the answer is you can look at the religious demographics in the polling that Biden did better in 2020 versus what the Democrats did in 2016 and 2024. And that he had a nice spike in those that are religiously unaffiliated. He did better among Catholics, and that was really significant. And part of that is his own Catholic faith. And he did better among white mainline Protestants. And it's those two numbers particularly, the Catholics and white mainline Protestants, that explains why Biden won in 2020 when Democrats failed in the other two elections. And yet, that wasn't what the media focuses on. The question was over and over, can Biden in 2020 win white evangelicals? Can Harris in 2024 win white evangelicals? No, and it doesn't matter. Like, that was not really what the election was about. And so that's that limited view that we continue to see. For instance, even just thinking about in my world of Baptist, Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination, deserves a lot of attention, but it gets way more attention than it actually deserves. Right? Southern Baptists are less than half of Baptists in the United States. But they get a whole lot more coverage than that. And so what happens, if you think about what that means, is if you make the average Baptist, the only vision of Baptist, Southern Baptist, Baptists turn out to be more Trumpian, more right-wing, whiter, and more Southern and rural than Baptist overall. And especially than Christians overall. So we get this distorted image of Christianity in general, as well as Christianity in public life and politics. I mean, Speaker Mike Johnson and House Minority Leader Jeffries are both Baptist. And if that doesn't tell you that there's some diversity there in the tradition that needs to be unpacked a little bit more, then we're really missing the whole story here.
Yeah. Is there a sense or a fear, you think, from I guess secular reporters, I'm not really quite sure like how to define them, but is there a fear to just talk about Christianity in their reporting? I mean, because it seems like, especially during COVID, right? Lockdowns, all kinds of other stuff. I mean, I didn't see a lot of like Christian connected news to some of these churches protests, or whatever. And I mean, like, obviously those that are writing about it, like you and others, that are in this space, but it seems like that should have been a much bigger deal. So like, do you think there's like a fear or hesitation to want to really, spotlight Christianity in a negative light?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of that fear, and also I think it does come back to just the the lack of literacy. I mean, so the opening example that I have, the opening story that I tell in my newest book, the Bible According to Christian Nationalist, is I was attending what was billed as a prayer rally for gerrymandering, and we can put all aside all the implications of that, because I've looked through the whole Bible and I haven't found anything about gerrymandering in there. But anyways, it was this prayer event for gerrymandering. And it was billed as that, right? But it also had several state, this is in the Missouri Capitol, had several state politicians were speaking at it. I wrote about it at the time, and then I reflect on it in the book, because then there were also a couple of political reporters that showed up at the event. And in their reporting, there was zero reference to prayer, zero reference to the Bible verses that were used, zero references at all to Christianity. Like, if you read that, their reporting, it was just a normal political rally about gerrymandering. And I thought that completely misses like the whole point and the uniqueness of the rally. And particularly from a religious perspective, the just outright heresies that were involved in it, right? And so, yeah, I don't know if that was a complete lack of biblical literacy, a fear of, misquoting or miswriting about religion and angering and having critique. I mean, sometimes I think that, right-wing evangelicals have done a little bit of the working the ref strategy, and have kind of scared off reporters from critiquing and writing about negative.
It was interesting when we first, not first, that's not what, but I guess when we were first getting people on to talk about January 6th is what I meant to say. One of the people that came on, I'm forgetting their names, but they essentially did a project that talked about the religious imagery, right? On January 6th. Yeah. On civil religion. So and it was fascinating because they showed all the very explicit Christian imagery there. And then maybe we even talked to you, Brian, just about, I don't remember, we talked to maybe you and other people about the report that came out about it from Congress, and essentially mentioned very little.
Yeah, completely ignored. I mean, there were references in the report, the January 6th Select Committee, House Select Committee on January 6th. There are as many references to Islamic terrorism, which had literally nothing to do with January 6th, as there are to Christian nationalism, right? And you cannot understand what happened on January 6th, how we got to it, and thus prevent it from happening again in the future without unpacking. And we know this from the reporting, why there's that blind spot. I think this is exactly your question, although this was a politician as opposed to a reporter. But Bo Underwood and I talked about this in Baptizing America, but Representative Liz Cheney, who deserves lots of praise, lots of accolades for her profiles and courage and willing to end her career by standing up for what she believed was right. But one area where I would critique her is the fact that apparently, as the vice chair of this committee, she was absolutely adamant that they have nothing in the report that could be seen as criticizing conservative, patriotic American Christians, right? And so then the report ignores all of the religious symbols, all the religious rhetoric, all the Christian nationalist extremism that helped fuel this fire that we saw on January 6th. And so, like I said, that means we're not prepared to prevent it from happening again, or to prevent, a second term of Donald Trump, right? Because we didn't really address the problem of how we got here in the first place, out of fear of upsetting some people. But I mean, as a Christian, right? And, I have no problem critiquing Christian nationalism and the violence that it brought on January 6th. Like, critiquing the Christian nationalism of January 6th is not inherently an attack on Christians. But I think that's what Representative Cheney saw. I think that's what some journalists are fearful as well.
And so where do you think that comes from, this sense that they're so afraid to say anything about it because they're going to get, I guess, like, when this issue is significant, right? Because you do see kind of a willingness to talk about radical Islam in certain ways, and then you have certain people critique, the left, quote unquote, for not, for being in bed with Islam or something like that. I've heard that kind of thing. Like, how can you, care so much about Islam? Don't you know their values are so antithetical to liberal, progressive values? And in some ways that may be true, depending on conservative versus progressive Muslim. But it's like, you look at this and you see this willingness to critique, and you don't see a willingness necessarily to critique Christianity in some of these circles here. And yet it feels like there is like a mocking of Christianity, or a willingness to critique it. I guess I'm trying to suss out, like, Is it just when it's a political thing, when there could be political like ramifications in your mind, that there's this kind of concealment of Christianity's culpability when it comes to what's happening? Or is it like, I guess, how have you kind of understood that? If the question makes sense, I could try to, if it doesn't make sense, I'll try to have more clarity, but I'm just trying to kind of dig in deeper to what is behind this omission.
Yeah. I think there is, in addition to things that we've already talked about, I mean, there is a well-funded, well-established, outrage machine. And so, any criticism of, right-wing evangelicals or right-wing Catholics can quickly spark on social media and in big media platforms, the criticism that you're anti-Christian. And these things can take off, without any proof or even when it's clearly not true. I mean, let me just give you, like one little example. I'll give you a political example because it's something I'm sure everyone's heard about, but as opposed to like a journalism example. But there was a lot of attention, a lot of outrage and, attention to Harris during the 2024 campaign. When supposedly the story went that someone in one of her crowds yelled that Jesus is Lord, and she said, "Oh, you're at the wrong rally." Turns out that's not actually what happened, right? But the outrage machine was prepared and prompt to create this big narrative that she was the anti-Christian candidate, even though she was the only candidate of the two in that race that actually is a member of a church and actually attends church. Right? But she was somehow the anti-Christian church, but that's actually not what she was responding to at all. She was responding to someone who was shouting something else. And the video was manipulated. That's completely in a different place, that she doesn't hear that comment. And you can go through the audio evidence and the video evidence and you can find that that's not what she heard and that's not what she's responding to. And yet that's now accepted as just common fact, right? So, there is this real danger, and reporters know this. They know that they can get hit with the online mob, and it particularly, is problematic when we have, platforms like X, which has been completely destroyed by a white supremacist. These platforms are now geared to create the outrage towards reporters.
I want to get into some of your reporting inside the Pentagon, and a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about will probably be a little bit heavy. So I want to start first with a more lighthearted question, if you could. And I'll wait till I wanted to wait till you're done sipping your coffee.
Yeah. You didn't want to do a Jon Stewart
I like that moment? Mug though. I like that mug.
So I'd love for you just to tell me what are these three things have in common? Samuel Jackson, Ezekiel, and the Department of War.
Yeah. I knew that's where you were going. Oh, yes. By now everyone knows, right, that at the April prayer service at the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth offered a prayer that he said that had been prayed by a group in the military, and that was coming from Ezekiel 25:17, and was only slightly edited, but basically a monologue that Samuel L. Jackson gives in the movie Pulp Fiction. And I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, literally, so I was, like with the Doug Wilson service, this was a couple months later, I was the only reporter apparently watching the service live. We break the news. It was a Wednesday. They're usually on Wednesday. We had the report came out a couple hours afterwards, Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday evening, there was a couple, there was a big news outlet in Australia, and I think the New Yorker, both had a piece about the service, but both citing us for having discovered it. And then it was Thursday morning that it just blew up. And by Thursday night, Stephen Colbert is making jokes about it. I mean, it was just bucket list item of wrote a piece that inspired a Colbert monologue. And then also Saturday Night Live, of course, had fun with it. I mean, just all kinds of things, all because, I mean, honestly, I just say, if I wasn't watching the service, I'm not sure we would know that he hadn't used this Pulp Fiction prayer, right? That's what's still stunning to me, is that no one else is watching these services. No one's else reporting what's happening. And it's so significant I think we need to be doing this. But yeah, I mean, still weird moment that I can't believe. So when I first reported it, my first post on social media was, I think I wrote something like, "I promise I'm not writing for The Onion now." But this just happened. Because I still can't believe it's a real thing.
Yeah. I'm curious if you can just go into detail about like what are these services that are happening at the Pentagon. Assume that you're talking to somebody that hasn't seen your other 5,000 appearances on Faithful Politics. and just talk about, like, I mean, is it normal to have services at the Pentagon? Is it, like what makes what Pete Hegseth is doing so unique or just out there?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about SNL. Do y'all like a 5-timers club or like a 10? I don't know. I'm not sure I'm at 10 yet, but I think I should be in like the 5-timers club.
We need to.
You definitely need like a robe. We've talked about robes. We've talked about T-shirts. I don't know.
So yes, and it's funny. So I've written a bunch of pieces. I watch these every month because I've made poor life decisions apparently, and occupational hazard. But and every month we report them. There's always some comment on social media of a worship service at the Pentagon that shouldn't exist. Like to me, like it feels like everyone should know about this by now. But obviously, like people are still discovering it, and so because there's just so much. I mean, there's just so much stuff. There's too much stuff happening in the world to keep track of everything right now. So let's start first with thinking of your all series of historically, what does this mean? Like, this is unprecedented. So I think that's the first part before I talk about like what is happening. The idea of the federal government or an agency of the federal government organizing, planning, hosting a Christian worship service has very little precedent at all. I mean, the one example that we have prior to the Trump administration is that Richard Nixon did this in the White House some. And Nixon did it on Sunday mornings as like an alternative to church. And he did it because, and we know this from his own, diaries and writings and so forth. He did this because he was afraid of reporters catching him doing something stupid in church, right? So he wanted to control church. He had two fears. One, he was afraid that like he might be caught, not knowing the words to a hymn or something, which is, a great fear, right? There's a clip going around of Donald Trump clearly not knowing the Lord's Prayer at Lindsey Graham's funeral, right? I mean, that's exactly the type of moment. You can see, J.D. Vance and a couple other cabinet members are like clearly mouthing the Lord's Prayer. They clearly know it. And Donald Trump is like, saying like every like fifth, moving his mouth like every like fifth or sixth word, right? And I'm not sure he's saying any of the words correctly, but he's like clearly.
That's the only time he's ever moved his mouth that infrequently.
Yeah, exactly, right? He clearly doesn't know it, right? And so that's like the moment Nixon was afraid of. Like he didn't want to get caught like that, and then he also was afraid that a pastor would take the opportunity with the president sitting in the sanctuary to mouth off on something political. Right. And I mean, that's something that has happened to a number of presidents have actually been kind of sabotaged by or hit, ambushed by a pastor. And it did happen later one time, actually, to Nixon, when he thought he had a safe pastor. He'd gone to the church on vacation in Florida multiple times, and the pastor did hit him on something at one time. And so and it was a big media firestorm. Right. So that was the whole reason he created these services. He had them like once a month. It was pretty infrequent, which is, still better church attendance than a lot of presidents have had, other than like Carter and Biden. But so that he could control the service. What was who prayed, who preached, even who was invited for the VIP. I mean, this was all planned. Sometimes when they had big votes happening in Congress, they would pick which members of Congress they needed to persuade on a vote, so they would invite them to come to the White House church service. And I've read through the sermons, the transcripts of these, and the pastors they all backed away. Like they got, there was even a couple in their diaries that had written a different sermon and were planning to like go in there and preach, truth to power. And then they couldn't do it. They were wowed by being in the White House in the presence of Richard Nixon and cabinet members and members of Congress, right? So it worked. This is what he wanted to do. And so that's like the one example we have. And then what's happening now then is it starts in the Pentagon with Pete Hegseth in May of 2025. He launched what he said would be monthly worship services, and they have been monthly. Even in October with the government shutdown, there was still a worship service in the Pentagon. But these are different in a couple of key ways. It's less about Hegseth trying to control religion because he's fearful of being used against him. It's more about him establishing his brand of religion on the Pentagon. So these are not Sunday. These are not like alternatives to churches, because he's going to a church in Doug Wilson's denomination many Sundays. And we know this because there are always protesters outside that church in D.C. Every week. And so sometimes we see footage of Hegseth and his family going in and out as protesters are yelling at him. And so it's not on Sunday. It's during the work hours, during the work week, usually Wednesday. It's often, they say, the noon, they tried to say it's during lunch. So it's voluntary, but it's not always. So the one this week actually was an hour later. It got bumped. It got pushed back to 1 p.m. That's happened a couple other times. So it's not always, during lunch, if you will. And so this is a way of him trying to establish his version of Christianity in the Pentagon. So there have been 15 of these monthly services. I've tracked down who has preached at all of them. And with one exception, and we'll talk about him in a moment, because he's not much of an exception, but with one exception, 14 of the services, the sermon has been preached by a right-wing, evangelical, patriarchal Christian. And the other one is a right-wing Fox News host who used to be a Catholic priest and then left the priesthood to get married and have a family. And so they're all right-wing Christians. 14 of the sermons have been by evangelicals, one by a Catholic former colleague of Hegseth at Fox News. A lot of them have personal connections. Wilson has preached once. His personal pastor in Wilson's congregation denomination has preached now 3 times, including the one this week. There have been 7 services with a Southern Baptist, 2 members of the Graham family, Franklin Graham and one of his sons. And so this is the type of, so it's not a diversity of Christianity, let alone other religious traditions in the Pentagon. It is, Hegseth is establishing his brand, his version of Christianity. And the services follow a pretty traditional format, traditional for them. Like there's been 15 of these now. Most of them have the basic format. A chaplain or somebody in the military will introduce the service, welcome everyone to come, basically do what you do in a church service, Josh, right? The first person who gets up there is like, get everyone to quit talking, start listening, and say an opening prayer, right? That's usually, the opening.
Be quiet and pay attention.
Exactly, right? Like saying it nicely, right? Yes. Welcome, thanks for coming. That's the code for it. Now you all need to stop talking because I'm at the microphone.
Shut up, we're at the microphone.
and then Hegseth will come up and offer some remarks, usually reads a bit of scripture, and does a prayer. So that's how the Pulp Fiction thing happens early in the service, as he's doing his opening remarks, scripture reading and prayer. And he often reads from a psalm. But he particularly likes the war passages of the Bible, the war psalms. And then, and then there'll be the guest preacher will come up. He'll introduce the guest preacher.
You have to say America, Brian. You have to
America.
It's war, America.
I'll work on that before the next episode. And then they'll sing a couple songs. And there's been a couple times they've had a guest contemporary Christian musician to come, but it's usually someone in the military or the pastor. So like his own pastor just leads the singing himself at the end of his sermons. They always end with the doxology. They always say the Lord's Prayer together. They always end with the doxology before the person that was there at the beginning usually comes up and does the quick benediction and dismissal, right? So that's a pretty standard. That's how the Pentagon services look. And Hegseth's effort has inspired similar services now in other federal agencies. So the Department of Labor had, I think, 5 different months, and I was the only one who watched those and wrote about those. And they ended when the former secretary, Lori Chavez-DeRemer, was ousted among various financial and sexual scandals. And so they have not restarted yet, although we'll see if the acting director is confirmed, if he'll bring them back or not. And there's been at least one service at the Small Business Administration. There have been a couple of different services at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They just had one in May that they're promising they're going to now try to do it quarterly. They previously announced they were going to do it monthly, but I guess it was too much work. And so now they're going to try to do it quarterly. We'll see if they actually get it off the ground. And those ones are all a little bit more private. So the Pentagon it's live stream, but it's not like on YouTube. It's on a site that is used.
Very specific site. You have to have a link to that kind of stuff, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's hard to find. I figured out how to find them every month. They don't advertise when they're going to be. So I have to kind of manually figure out when the service is going to be so that I can watch it. I think that's one reason why no other reporters are covering it, is because they don't know how to find it. And one of the few other reports that's actually happened from a live viewing this year is because I helped the reporter, tune in and view it by giving them the link. But then the other ones have been more either not live streamed or have been more privately live streamed for like employees. Like the Department of Labor one is supposed to only be for employees. So that's what's been happening. And this is unprecedented. It's crazy. And this is, it's a massive First Amendment violation. This is members of the cabinet trying to establish their faith on their federal employees as if you work for the government, you are a right-wing Christian. Like that's like that. And if you're not, then now you're being othered in your own place of work, that you're not fully American, you're not fully a member of the Pentagon or fully a member of the Department of Labor or whatever. You're being othered. And we know from anonymous comments from people, particularly in the Pentagon, that people are fearful that if they don't show up, that it could hurt their career if they don't have that face time. The Pentagon will tell you that it's voluntary and they're not keeping track of who's there. Although on their live streams, it's not just like they just zoom in on the stage. They have like 4 or 5 different camera angles and they're panning. It's quite a production. And at some point they will show every single person in the audience. So if they want to know who's there, they do have a record of who is actually there. And both defense contractors and members of the military have said they feel pressure. They feel an expectation that they're not there. It could hurt them.
Defense contractors.
So they're not just inviting the military. They're also sending out these invites to defense contractors. And if you're a defense contractor and you're not a Christian, if you're a defense contractor and you are a Christian, we might need to have a conversation. But if you're a defense contractor, repent and sin no more. But if you're a defense contractor and you're not a Christian, you're like, well, if I don't show up, will this cost me $1 billion contract? Okay, fine. I'll go sit through a church service.
What if
for
the other
35
guy shows
minutes.
up?
Yeah. So
the competitor shows up. They're going to give them the contract.
Exactly. So you sit through 35 minutes of a worship service because you want to make some more money.
Yeah. We should just start a defense contracting company called Integrity Defense. Or some like Dove or some spiritual name, and then we'll be like set from like the beginning. So let me put on my David Barton. Right? Let me put on my David Barton. I hate to say it, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to put on my David Barton hat, wall builder's hat. And I'm going to say, Brian, what about Thomas Jefferson and the worship services in the Capitol? Yeah. What about those?
Great question.
So obviously those happen. So, whatever Barton, he would take that and then interpret it as.
Brian just said David Barton had a great question.
Yeah, I didn't say he had a great answer to it, though.
That's true. Hey, yeah, you're right. But I put up, so what is it, David Barton, or is it me channeling David Barton? I don't know. I got to figure this out. But really what I'm trying to get at, right? So we have Thomas Jefferson, you have Nixon, right? And so you have some people say, hey, if they want to have a worship service, whatever. They're not forcing people to be there, right? I'm assuming it doesn't say you have to attend. Now, if it does, maybe that's there, right? So, but, they're forcing people. What I'm trying to do, Brian, is I'm thinking about the arguments of people I know and love and what they're going to think. Well, they're having worship services in the Department of Defense. So what? When's lunch? I don't care. But why is this so bad? This is always what I'm trying to get at. Like, it's violating norms, unprecedented, like you said, right? Constitutional limits and issues. It's creating tensions. But let's even dig deeper into this. Like, we have some of these examples. So why is this one so egregious as compared to, say, Nixon, or even some of these like very early examples? And of course, that people will go to that to try to show, well, don't you know, they prayed, and Benjamin Franklin's prayer meeting and all the things we've covered in this 250 series, by the way. So go back and look at all that and see the actual historical facts around it. But what is your response when someone brings that, as nice as you can be? What's your response when someone brings these things in their questioning in that line?
Yeah, it is a really important distinction. It is a good question. Here's the answer that's different than what Barton will give you, though, his bad answer. So, and then the difference here, these are government worship services. And I use that language very intentionally. As I mentioned earlier, like, this is unprecedented to have federal agencies that are organizing, planning, hosting worship services. So we've been tracking all these, by the way, at a Public Witness. So if people want to follow, if you go to publicwitness.wordandway.org, up at the top, you'll see Government Worship Watch. We have about 24 services now between all these agencies that I just mentioned.
Is that next to the donate button, Brian? Is that next to the donate?
Yeah, no.
Button?
But there's
somewhere around there.
button. Yeah, so while you're there, be sure to hit subscribe as well.
Make sure you donate, guys. Come on.
That's good. That's good. But like, you can read the page for free. But Government Worship Watch, that's the key difference here. These are government-run worship services, and that should raise the cynicism, the fears of all of us. The idea that the government is planning and creating worship services. So what Thomas Jefferson goes to is not a government worship service. It's a church worship service that happened to be held in a government building. And part of the reason for that is that there really weren't any other buildings yet in DC. I mean, we talk about drain the swamp. Well, back then they were like draining the swamp to build buildings, like create land and build buildings, right? And so they were essentially, needing space. And this is not unusual. Like, we're all familiar with this. There are churches that start all the time in, say, like a public school. And I have no problem with a church renting a school cafeteria and coming, and if you've been a part with one of those church plants, like, it's a lot of work because, you have to show up and set up for service, and you have to tear down for service, especially during the school year. Like, there's not a whole lot of grace coming if you leave a mess before, right? That is not justification, though, for then the school, like planning during school hours, a worship service for students to come and tend to. Those are completely different things. And the reason why is because it's a public building and it's open for other groups to rent as well. As long as school isn't happening, as long as you're not interfering with the classroom time. And so that's what's happening with the service Jefferson attends. He's essentially attending a service that's, rented in a public school today, as opposed to the public school creating its own worship service, which is what Hegseth is doing. So that's a really significant distinction here. And really, like I said, other than Nixon, we don't have a good parallel. And Nixon is different a little bit because it's on Sunday mornings. And so it's not during the workday in all these, these various federal agencies. And also, if like your only precedent for doing something is Richard Nixon, I mean, we might want to rethink that.
It's so true. Yeah. Nixon's my hero. I mean, Definitely. Like, not all of us can have tattoos of Nixon on our back, like Roger.
Yeah, Roger Stone.
But, we one thing we didn't talk about, but I think it's important because I do still want to actually talk about some of your reporting just from this week. But I want to talk about kind of the denominations that are represented in the Pentagon worship services. Because I think that's important, because for somebody that may not know who Doug Wilson is, or have never heard of like the CREC, or, and kind of like what these viewpoints represent, I think it would be a different story. Because if Obama was holding, Muslim, whatever, like services in the White House, people would hate that because, or the religious right would hate that because of like, they're saying, oh, the ideology is, this or that. So what's the ideology that's actually being represented in these worship services?
Yeah. And so like I said, about half of the services have had a Southern Baptist preacher, which is already then saying something. And we're talking about, far to the right of the political and religious spectrum. And, they don't allow women to preach. They'll kick women out, holding a pretty hard line on a lot of things. And so most people are probably fairly familiar, at least with like the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you use that as like your base point, and these are the moderate preachers, if you will. I mean, right? These are the less extreme preachers that have been showing up, because you're going to have to jump to the right of that to get to Franklin Graham and his son. I mean, Franklin Graham does the Christmas service, which, by the way, is the most bizarre Christmas service I've ever watched in my life, as he talks about a God of war and then reads a passage of genocide in the Old Testament and tells the military that they need to be willing to follow God in doing that too. Right? Happy birthday, Jesus. And so so we're moving out even further to right to get the CREC, the nomination that Doug Wilson started. And so Wilson has preached once, Brooks Pottinger has preached 3 times. So that's 4 of the 15 services are coming from these two people in that denomination. This is Doug Wilson wants to repeal the 19th Amendment, which means he doesn't think women should be allowed to vote. He has defended slavery and, said it really wasn't that bad, right? I mean, so we're talking about I would say the fringe, except for the fringe is now like the whole rug. The fringe is mainstream now. But like historically a fringe figure and the far, far right of American Christianity. And that's who's getting platformed, particularly in the Pentagon. The Pentagon services have been more extreme than the others. And it's like I said, there's no diversity here. I would have a problem with it if these were Christian worship services and there was the full breadth of Christianity, right? Like you bring in a middle of the road United Methodist preacher one month, and then you have your Southern Baptist preacher, and then you have a liberal Episcopalian. I would have a problem with Hegseth creating these kind of government worship services, but there's not even diversity within Christianity. There's really not even diversity among like right of center Christianity. This is really going to one extreme.
Yeah, that it's very problematic, and I definitely understand why it's so problematic. Like looking at the government, which is supposed to be essentially a neutral organization, institution, when it concerns its citizens, a neutral and religion, right? Certainly a neutral organization, and that seems to be pretty far from the truth right now in terms of any kind of real neutrality. And, you've been doing some reporting. I'd love for you to kind of talk through some of your recent reporting that you've done on this, and what trends are you noticing? Is it getting better, worse, or what do you see the future holding? We got some midterms coming up. Yeah. And so do you think that is the preaching going to get more about, some midtermy kind of stuff, or is it going to stay, that kind of stuff? Where do you see this moving?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in these agencies, I'm not sure they're going to necessarily they haven't gotten real partisan yet. But they have gotten very much of like, we're a Christian nation. God has called you to do this work in this agency, and we see this in multiple agencies, not just in the Pentagon. And that this expectation then that the best government employees are going to be Christians who are doing God's will in their job. Like that rhetoric is really strong in the Pentagon ones. A lot of it has intensified since the war in Iran in justifying that. That's where the Pulp Fiction thing is coming from. He's saying that prayer, by the way, this prayer of vengeance and wrath, great fury. He's saying that as a prayer for the war in Iran. And so, which, again, if you know anything about the movie, that when Samuel Jackson is giving that monologue, the key time in the movie, he does it multiple times. He's first doing it right before he just unloads on an unarmed guy. Right. And so that's a little bit of a weird kind of like justification for the Iran war type moment. And then I guess Hegseth is no better at reading Ezekiel than he is actually watching Pulp Fiction, because he must not have made it to the end of the movie where Samuel L. Jackson has like a conversion experience and realizes that he's been reading the passage and implying it completely incorrect. And rather than being the righteous good guy, he's actually the evil with his violence. Right. So that's a real irony. Like not only can you not read the Bible correctly, you can't even watch the movie correctly. That's like, I would normally say to someone like that, like, don't quit your day job, but like, actually, please do. Go do more biblical and movie interpretation without being in your day job. So I think it's gotten more extreme in that regard. That's kind of like the crazy peak of it. But like, honestly, his prayer the month before that was the most violent prayer that I have like ever heard, other than maybe like Mark Twain's war prayer, which was satire, and brilliant satire at that. But like, I don't know how you even satirize now Hegseth like violent prayers in the Pentagon now, because he's doing it like as if it's reality, as if this is what God would want, and the preachers are doing it too. Like I mentioned, Franklin Graham preaching about preaching genocide and talking about a God of war. This week, Hegseth's pastor, Brooks Pottinger, praised the U.S. military as a means of God's grace. And so this blessing and the sanctification of the violence and the death. I mean, here we are illegally blowing up boats of fishermen and by one report, even human trafficking victims in the boats. We're blowing up these boats in the Caribbean and Atlantic Pacific, around, Colombia and Venezuela. And that's a means of God's grace. I mean, we're blowing up a school of Iranian, girls. And not only is that a means of God's grace, but at his first sermon, Brooks Pottinger claimed that, hey, wherever a Tomahawk missile or Minuteman missile falls, that's all God's plan. And this was before the school talk. So it's not Hegseth's fault that we blew up a school. It's what God wanted. I mean, that's the rhetoric we're getting here. And that's why I think the Pentagon services, one, they've gotten more attention, not just the Pulp Fiction one, when we report on them. But I think that is because they are more alarming. Like, I think it's bad the Department of Labor was holding monthly services. I think it's bad that USDA and SBA have been holding some services. But, like, they don't have a military behind them. Like, when the Pentagon is embracing Christian nationalism, and especially this violent version of Christian nationalism, it's a whole lot more dangerous. Not just to, like, people, not just to the nation and to the world. It's also more dangerous to our faith. Like, the corruption here. To take a book that is mostly written by and to people living at the margins and the edges of empire that are being hunted down and oppressed by empire, and then flipping that to instead make this about blessing the empire of the world. Because, I mean, let's just be honest, like, we are Egypt of Exodus. We are Babylon of Daniel. We are Rome of the Gospels. And so, like, the bastardization that is happening here of our holy text is even more problematic and alarming when it's happening in the Pentagon than, say, like, the Department of Labor.
I was sitting here thinking, we've kind of joked a few times about how often you've been on the show, but every time you come on, there's always something new. and we clearly don't have enough time to get into, like, all the social media posts and the Bible verses, but really recommend for folks to check those episodes out. But my question to you is, it's a bit more reflective, and it sort of taps into kind of like your years of experience of covering this stuff. I'd love to know if, let's see if I can get this. If the Brian from this book,
look at him, so young and innocent.
Look at that guy,
not jaded or cynical yet.
like how? What's the evolution of religion and politics from the Brian from that picture to the Brian that's sitting here in front of us?
Yeah, so I remember, right, the book came out in, like, 2015. So pre-Trump rise. So yeah, that I mean, boy, have things changed then. Yeah, I think the main difference is a lot of the concerns are no longer theoretical. I mean, even back then, and I don't remember if it was in that book or a different book, but even back then, like, I enjoyed always sharing, I've probably done on a previous episode with y'all, my favorite quote on thinking about, mixing church and state, which is from the now late author and pastor and professor Tony Campolo, that mixing church and state is like mixing ice cream and manure. It doesn't hurt the manure, but it sure messes up the ice cream. And that's kind of also the Roger Williams idea of separation of church and state that Thomas Jefferson was borrowing from. Roger Williams was concerned about the purity of the church, the garden. So he wanted a wall, a hedge, protecting it from the wilderness, the politics, right? And we'd seen hints of that. We've seen, spikes of Christian nationalism throughout the years, throughout our history, as you all have been covering. But we're at a whole different level now. I mean, we're so deep in the manure now that, like, I mean, we're all sick of it. We're tired of it, yes, but, like, we're stuck in it, and we can't seem to wash it off. And I think that's what the biggest change has been, is that, I mean, this is a real problem, and we are losing entire generations because of this. I mean, I think we might all be millennials. I'm an old millennial. Some of us millennials are getting really
Same.
old. I'm born in like the second week of the millennial generation, according to Pew. So like some of us are getting old, but like millennials and younger generations, like our era, our generations have been growing up in this mixing of church and state and the Christian nationalism, and are walking away from the churches, right? And the evangelical and charismatic church embrace of Donald Trump is going to leave a mark on a generation. I mean, we're going to find ourselves essentially in a generational wilderness wandering before people are going to trust the church again. And that's what has really changed, is recognizing like, wow, like we have mixed the ice cream and the manure here because we ourselves crapped all over it. Like we did this to the church's witness.
Yeah, man, it's really tough. And I agree with you, man. We have done a real disservice to the gospel by mixing it with Caesar.
I mean, Caesar's, is the best example. I mean, we have never seen a political figure in 250 years of the United States that is more Caesarean than we're living with a guy who's putting his face on gold coins.
Everything.
I mean, render unto Caesar. You can't make this stuff. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
We have mixed Caesar and the gospel. We've exchanged the gospel of Jesus for a gospel of Trump, a gospel of empire, essentially. I mean, that's always the Bible always offers empire versus Yahweh.
And it's never gone well. It's never gone well when we mix with empire.
Never,
South Africa, Nazi Germany, South African apartheid, Nazi Germany, Constantine. Like it is always destroyed the witness of the church anytime we've gotten in bed with empire.
And Yahweh is always, and God, the God of the Bible that I look at right then, ultimately represented in Jesus, has always been against empire. Always, from the very beginning. If you look at it and you understand the text and context, it is an anti-imperial text from the beginning. And it's hard for Americans to see that. I mean, it's just really hard because when you are in the empire, it's very difficult for you to see and accept anti-imperial texts. It's just really hard. And but it's necessary, and it's the challenge. It's the challenge all of us who are Christians and are trying to push back against and are getting the kind of vitriol that we receive. It's because of the idol. It's because of the thing that we are attacking. It's the safety, security, and the things that people have invested their lives into. And I just think we have to understand that it's not going to be easy. Idols don't leave easily. They fight. And so I'm going to keep praying for that. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And, we've asked every guest this, Brian, on this series. And the question is, we just had the 250th anniversary of the United States, right? We're in that year, the 250th year. And so the question is, I guess it would be 250 to 251. Yeah, so the 250th. What does this mean for you? Like, what is the significance of this date? And what are your prayers and hopes for the next 250 years, so to speak?
Well, I mean, let's not make the assumption that the American empire will last another 250 years because all empires fall at some point. So
they do eventually, yes.
Yeah. Praise God, all empires fall. There we go. So, I think that's actually the first thing. Like July 5th of 2026 was a Sunday. Right. And my encouragement for the last couple of years as I've been, around churches and denominational groups and warning that this year was going to be a spike of Christian nationalism but when I found a spike in 1976 with the bicentennial, we've talked about that in Baptizing America. So I've been warning people for a couple of years. It was so much worse than I expected. I've been warning people hard enough, but I've been saying, hey, you're going to see a spike with the 250th anniversary. I would always say, July 5th of 2026, a Sunday, the day after, the 250th, it's just another Sunday. Because the 4th of July is not a liturgical holiday. And so that's why I've been trying to encourage people. So I think that's my first answer here. Like, what does the 250th mean? Well, as a Christian, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just another Sunday. It's just another year. And we're called to be faithful in whatever context we find ourselves in. And it's easy to be like, I don't want to be in this kind of context. And then, that's like, Frodo, like, I wish I didn't have this ring. And Gandalf says, like, no one who lives in such times, I'm going to paraphrase, but no one who lives in such times wants this, but we don't get to pick the times we live in. It's just like, will we be faithful in this time? And that's unfortunately, this is the moment that we're in. But my second thing that I think this year has meant is I want us to get back, and you all have helped do this with the series, to what is truly worth celebrating and is remarkable about the American experiment. And it's not that we were founded as a Christian nation, because we weren't. It's that we were the first nation to try this experiment of separating church and state. And it's a remarkable thing that had occurred. It's remarkable that we have these men, because they didn't let the women in, but they had these men who lived in a Christian nation. They knew what a Christian nation was. They knew what a Christian nation was like, and they knew how to create a Christian nation, and could have said so in a constitution. They knew what a Christian nation looked like, and decided, let's try something different. Like, let's not only try a radical political experiment and say no king, no Caesar, but let's also try a radical experiment and say no state church, no state religion. It's a remarkable experiment. I mean, this is how remarkable it is. There's a story of, in 1776, of a group of Baptists going to the leaders of Massachusetts and wanting to disestablish the Congregational Church. Because at this point, with a couple of exceptions, all of the colonies had a state church. And they eventually all get rid of them. But they're going to Massachusetts, which is like really the worst colony when it comes to church. I mean, Massachusetts was a Christian national state. They kicked out Roger Williams. That's why he went and started Rhode Island, the first colony that had absolute freedom. They hung Quakers for being Quakers. And if you know anything about Quakers, if you're hanging Quakers because you can't get along with them, that really says more about you than it does them. So Massachusetts is this hotbed of Christian nationalism. And this group of Baptists go and they want to disestablish them. Disestablish the Congregational Church. And John Adams, the future president, retorts that it's not going to happen, and that there is more likely to be a change in the solar system than a separation of church and state.
Huh.
Now, I don't know in that day in 1776 if John Adams went outside and carefully studied the stars. Because not only did that change in the solar system occur, it happened in his lifetime. Not only did he see the founding of the nation with a separation of church and state in the First Amendment and Article 6, but also every single state would eventually disestablish church and state, including Massachusetts, which was the last one, but they finally did it all in John Adams' lifetime. That's how radical of a shift this was, that he didn't think it was even possible, and then it happened. So that's, to me, what this year is about. And I'm afraid that we have lost so much of that vision and what it can mean and how the separation of church and state is good for both.
That is a phenomenal place to leave it, Brian. Thank you so much for everything, for your work. Make sure you guys check out Word and Way, Public Witness. It will be well worth your time. And thank you for sticking around with us for this whole series. Make sure you catch up on the episodes you haven't had a chance to. We'll make sure we have all the, links and stuff on our website and in the show notes. But definitely check it out, because there is a total of 16 episodes of some of the smartest people that talk about this stuff. You won't find this anywhere. So you might as well check it out here on Faith of Politics. And as always, make sure you keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you next time. Take care.